So we are going through the parables, and it's a amazing kind of teaching of how Jesus just speaks and how he's, we call it the great storyteller, right? Because he used parables to talk about his kingdom. He used parables to speak out and to hide things even for those that didn't want to listen, right? And so he used these parables to try to explain to everyone that would listen about his kingdom. And so today's topic, we've gone through some really good parables. In today's topic, I'm excited for it, but at the same time is a topic that it's not heard of every single time. It's not one of those that I go to church and it doesn't have a popularity. As a matter of fact, this topic that we're going to be, if we're honest enough, there's a lot of churches that run away from it because it doesn't hit, it doesn't match what the church is supposed to say, right? We are a church of God, his love, and that's who we are, and we ignore the rest. And so this topic itself, as excited as I am to share it, is not something that I take it lightly. It's not something that, I'm not saying that I have avoided it. I just pushed it down the parables of the stories and pushed it down into the end. And so this topic is very real, and this topic is about hell. And the reason it has such a bad issue with this topic is because we as Christians love to use it out of fear. It has this fear factor to it. And so today I want us to kind of go into the objections of why people don't use it or what people would say when it comes down to this specific topic, but at the same time to show you how God is loved through the whole thing. And I hope that out of this topic that we walk out of it knowing a little bit more about the love of God than the fear that hell supposedly has. And so there's a lot of different questions that we will ask. There's a lot of questions that people, even the churches nowadays, they'll ask things like, how can an all-loving God judge people? Makes sense, right? How can an all-loving God judge people? You'll hear questions like, why does God condemn people eternally for what they do in a finite amount of time? Right? Does it seem fair to punish eternally when we only have a certain amount of time in this world? We're not, we only live about 80 years, right? Average. So does it seem fair to be punished eternally? And so there's a lot of questions that get presented, and I don't think we know how to respond to it. And so I hope that through this objection of different scenarios that I'm going to go through, that it prepares you, and again, it allows you to see how God's love through the whole thing. I remember when I was 12 or so, we went to a church invited us to their Halloween party. And what this was, it was a presentation of hell and heaven. That's what it was. They didn't give out no candy. I was looking for candy. They didn't give out no candy. We got there and they said, all right, the youth, you're going to get in this bus. And when you got in the bus was blacked out. You couldn't see anything outside. It was at nighttime, first of all, but the bus, you couldn't see anything. So you get in the bus, you sit in a chair, right? And then they'll ride around and all of a sudden we hit something, right? Or the pretend of hitting something. And I walked out, right? And I remember it's all drama, right? There's nothing. They're just presenting the gospel. But here's how I learned about hell. And there's guy is laying down, there's blood everywhere, and then, he's dead. And then all of a sudden we walk through his life. And we go inside a house and we at this funeral and he goes to hell. And there we go. We're taking a ride to hell, right? And so now we're in this like scary house, and then there's demons popping up, there's people hanging, and it's just horrible. And all of a sudden it's dark, and I can't see anything, and I'm scared, and people are like bumping into me, and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, this is scary. At the end of this whole thing, then we walk through heaven, right? I could see it was angels. They were all white. And it was amazing. You got to sit down, they give you water, they treat you nice, and then they're like, do you want to accept Christ? Yes, I want to accept Christ. Like, what do you mean? I just went through hell. Like, come on, like I'm going to accept Christ. Here's the thing though. We like to put fear into our motives of presenting hell. We have this idea that fear will motivate people towards long-lasting faith in Christ, which I can tell you right now, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I accepted Christ that day, but the next day I was doing things that I shouldn't. Right? And here's the thing. I don't want you guys to think that fear is a wrong thing or is a bad thing, because throughout the Bible, we see that respecting God and fearing God is an understanding of his judgment on our sins, and it helps us appreciate his mercy and accept his offer of forgiveness. Philippians 2:12 says, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with what? With fear and trembling. So fear is not a bad thing. When fear when it becomes a bad thing is when we set it as the primary and exclusive reason to trust Christ. There's a difference between saying I fear God and I am afraid of God. And here's the thing, when fear is our motive, it will rarely, if ever, translate into a life of discipleship. And we are called to make disciples. So why are we talking about hell? Because in our lives, in our Christian's life, it shouldn't be a topic that we ignore or put it as a minor topic. Because it's not a minor topic. As a matter of fact, it's closely connected with the person that we know as Jesus and his teachings. I don't know if you ever heard people say that they don't like the Old Testament God. Right? If you read the Old Testament, I don't like the Old Testament God because he seems angry all the time. He's constantly like full of wrath and punishing people and destroying people. And people are like, I don't like that God. But I tell you who I like, and I accept a little bit more. I accept the God of the New Testament. I accept Jesus. I'm warmer to the idea of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is love. Right? He's full of love. He's full of grace, and he gives me helpful spiritual tips. The problem with this statement is that we are leaving out a big part of Jesus' teaching, which is about hell. And I don't think we tie those things. If as a matter of fact, we get most of our understanding of hell from the New Testament. And I don't know if you knew this. We get them from the words of Jesus. We don't get them from the Old Testament, right? That fearful God that destroys people. We don't get it from the Old Testament. We get a lot of our new ideas and an understanding of hell from the New Testament. If we were to divide Jesus' teachings into subjects, okay, you are going to find out that about 13% of his teachings were about hell. And because we are in the parables, and because we are going through pretty much some of his teachings and the best teachings and the way he presented it, right? I don't know if you knew this, but half of these parables are about hell. So in today's topics and today's message, I got a couple points, a few points that I want to share that brings up this topic, and also the objections and how to respond to these objections. The first objection that you're going to find is that hell is repulsive. Right? There's no way that the same God of love, right? Because hell is repulsive. And I'm here to tell you that we need to distinguish between liking or disliking something and whether that thing is true or not. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. It doesn't feel good to fire somebody. I don't know if you've ever been in that position, but it doesn't feel good to fire somebody. But it might be the right thing to do for your company. It might be the right thing to do for where you're at. On the other hand, there are times where something might feel good, but it doesn't mean that it's right. I was watching Netflix, and there's a show on Netflix, and I don't, you probably heard about this, because I remember when I was on my early 20s, I heard about this scandal, and it's about the Ashley Madison scandal. And what Ashley Madison was, right, was a website that you could go in to intentionally and actually cheat on your spouse. And they will find you other spouses that were wanting to cheat. And you'll pay a subscription, right? And so I remember hearing about this. I'm in my early 20s. All of a sudden, they got hacked. They got hacked, and they said, if you don't shut this down, we are going to reveal the names of every subscriber you've ever have right now. And they took it lightly. And so this show is on Netflix, and it goes through everything that kind of happened through those days. And what happened? They released the names because they didn't back up. And what happened? You started to see governors and you started to see people of influence on YouTube that were on that list. You started to see pastors on that list. You started to see evangelists on that list. You started to see people that on that list. You started to see them because of this massive hack. Right? One of the quotes from the founder, he says, the variety, the thrill and romance of it all, he says, is something that we all live for and should stop holding ourselves back from. Their motto was like, hey, life is short, have an affair. Cool. And the CEO used to present himself as somebody that was like, I don't need to have an affair. I have a good marriage. When in reality, he was doing even worse things. Why am I bringing this up? Because just because something feels good, it doesn't make it right. As a matter of fact, there are very few cultures in our world that are going to say that adultery is acceptable. Fortunately, we're one of them. The point that I'm trying to make is that just because people don't like something, in this case being the doctrine of hell, it doesn't change whether it's true or not. It's very real. It's in the Bible. Jesus teaches about it. So why is the church quiet? The second objection to hell is that hell is just unjust. Right? Hell is unjust. The punishment, it doesn't fit the crime. Hell is too harsh. It is far too long. The problem with this objection is that if you step out of our Western world, right, out of our little bubble, you're going to find out that some people have a total opposite feeling than what we do when it comes down to hell and God's judgment. Because there's a lot of evil in this world. In the villages of Africa, in the Middle East, and in India, and in China, you're going to find innocent men, innocent women, innocent children being raped, being killed, being kidnapped. Now, you tell them punishment doesn't fit the crime. We are hardwired to cry out for justice and against injustice. We accept that if a person murders somebody or rapes somebody, that they should be held accountable. I think we could agree to that. And if something gets off because, if someone gets off because of some loophole in the justice system, then what do? We cry out injustice, right? We say, that's not justice. Like I literally was watching a show. I watch Netflix a lot, guys. I'm sorry. I don't have regular TV. I'm really watching a show on how like women were being murdered back in the 70s and the 80s, and the cops didn't do anything about it. And because they never did anything about it, now that they're trying to do something, there is not enough DNA evidence. So the parents are saying that is injustice. A lot of people that are watching this show, I'm sitting there and I'm like, that's injustice. What is wrong with our system, right? Why? Because injustice is wrong. It has to be paid for. If we're being honest, we know that if our God is perfectly good and just, he must judge impartially and fairly. And therefore, consequences exist for the evil that people commit. I'm here to tell you that the doctrines of hell and God's love are not mutually exclusive. And you need to know that they do not contradict each other. Once we really truly understand what love is, you know that they fit perfectly together. There's two things that are true about God. The first thing, and I think we love the first part, right? The first thing is that God is love. I love it. Makes sense. Right? He's compassionate. Love it. Makes sense. He's merciful and long-suffering, and we see this throughout Scripture. The second thing that you need to know is that he is also just. He's moral and purely good. He is good because he is just. He's the ultimate judge. His justice is perfect and far different from the punishment that we as humans can give. The third objection that we're going to hear, is that hell is overkill. Let me give you an example, right? If I live a lifetime of sin, then what is a lifetime? 80 years old, average, right? You're going to tell me that I have to get punished for eternity if I just lived 80 years? That's overkill. It's a great question. First, you need to understand that the degree to which a person experiences punishment is not typically based on how long it takes them to commit a crime. It's based on the seriousness of the crime. Because it could take 6 seconds to murder someone. But you mean to tell me that we're just going to put him in jail for 6 seconds? Right? Because it's a time thing. Right? If I live my whole life, 80 years, do you think it's eternally, it's what I deserve? No. We put the person in jail for the rest of their lives if they kill somebody. It doesn't matter how long it took. Why? Because their life was taken away from them. Because of their actions, the punishment is based on the offense committed. Right? We understand that human life has value and worth. So we demand punishment that is equal value or worth. Now let's talk about sin. And let's talk about who we are sinning against. Romans 1:21-23. We're going to have it up on the screen. It says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave him thanks. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles." I don't have this in my notes, but it just came to me. I don't know if you guys ever read the story of Moses, Exodus, right? I don't know if you've ever been through that story, but there is a time where Moses goes up to the mountain and goes to pray, right? And then God has a conversation with Moses and says, when you go back there, the people, they're partying. They literally grabbed every piece of gold from every single person that was in that camp and created a calf, a golden calf. And they begin to worship it, and they begin to say, this is the God that freed us. I need you to understand this. This was not idolatry. This was replacing God. This wasn't an idol. This was idolatry. This wasn't an idol. This was replacing God. They said, we haven't heard from God. Let's make a God. Here's the thing that you need to also understand is that why was it a calf? Because an animal is beneath a human. See, the word of the people is that they cannot understand God. God is too big. God is too great. I just can't understand him. So let me make something that's beneath me that I understand. That's why God was so mad. That's why he wanted to destroy them. We replace God for things that we think we want and we think we understand and that are beneath us. Here's the thing, guys. Stealing from God is not the same thing as stealing from another person. God is an infinite, perfect being, a person of infinite value and worth. This means that our sin against him is infinite. Not something small that can easily fix, right? So you would agree with me that if the offense against God requires a punishment. If a person chooses to run away from God all their life, their 80 years of life, it is an infinite, eternal offense. Because the issue is not simply that the nature of sin or the sinner, but the one who is being sinned against. Let me give you an example. I have two little boys. You all met them. One of them is quiet. The other one's like me. A little too crazy. It's just God's honest truth. Here's the thing. They're in the age right now. Well, see, when they were little, it was cute. But they're in an age right now that they understand what they're doing. They hide things from me. They say things when they get mad. Oh, the other day, my son just straight up told my youngest son just straight up told my oldest son, he said, "You shut up." He was mad. He bowled. He's like, "You shut up, Lucas." Right? And I was like, "What'd you say?" Nothing. Right? Here's the thing. When my sons talk back to me, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to punish them based on what they did. I'm going to tell them, you need to go in that corner and you need to take a few seconds and you need to think about what you did. Because you talked back to me. And I think that every parent in the room wants their child to understand justice correctly, right? We want them to grow up understanding if you do the crime, you must do the time. Now, if my children, right, if my children do the same thing, if they talk back to their brothers, if they talk back to their friends, if they talk back to their equal, right, the punishment is very different. And I think we can understand that. But because I am the authority over them, their disobedience carries more of severe consequences. Now, apply this to an infinite, eternal, holy God. People wrongly assume that after living and committing a full life of sin, when they die and they go to hell, that in doing so, they're going to stop sinning. Here's a quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says, hell is God's great compliment to the reality of human freedom and dignity of human choice. The punishment is eternal because sin doesn't stop when people die. It continues. It's an ongoing punishment for an ongoing sin. Now let's talk about it, right? In Luke 17, you're going to find a parable that Jesus teaches, and it's the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Let me give you a little side notes of this parable, and because of time, we just won't read the whole thing. Here's the thing, though. This is the only parable where Jesus gives a name to a character. Other ones was the sower, right? He never gave a name to any of his parables except on this one. I need you to notice one thing about this. That Jesus gives this character a name, but he doesn't give it to the rich man. He just calls them the rich man and Lazarus. And you would think, and even back in the day, as he's telling this story, it makes a lot of sense if we say the rich man has a name because the rich man is respected, he has influence, he's grown, and he has education. It makes sense that his name is the one that's being said. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus gives the name to the poor. He gives the name to Lazarus. He's given identity to the poor. And that right itself will preach a whole new message that I want right now. Another thing is that Lazarus means God is my help. We should not assume that people who in this life did not wish to surrender their lives to Jesus would somehow change their mind in the next life. And this is presented very well in this parable. In Luke 16:37, right, to 38, Jesus is telling about this parable and this rich man that he's in hell, right? And he's crying out and he's telling God, send Lazarus to warn my family, to tell my 5 brothers that I'm in here, that I am suffering. He actually says, to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that they may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. And there's a lot that could be taken out of this story, and scholars debate on this. There's a lot of commentaries and books and studies on this specific story. But I want you to notice one thing that Jesus is pointing out in this specific story. And the point of it is that the rich man never asks to get out. He never tells God, let me out. He says, warn them. Is it the reason that he didn't want to get out because he wanted to continue to do the things that he used to do? Is it the reason that he didn't want to get out is because he was not ready to do this one thing? And this one thing that we all got to do is to surrender to Christ. Hell is not a place where people are held because they were pretty good people who didn't believe the right stuff in their lifetime. Listen to me. Hell is not full of people who have already surrendered to Christ, who have repented.